I was sitting at the dining table with Emma, my girlfriend, trying my best to impress her parents. Her dad was his usual reserved self, barely looking up from his newspaper, while her mom, Linda, was busy refilling everyone's coffee. The conversation had been light, small talk about work, weekend plans, and the weather, until Linda suddenly stopped mid-pour, her eyes locking on me. She set the coffee pot down slowly, as if weighing every word. "You need to know something," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made the room go silent. Emma's head turned sharply toward her mom. Her father's newspaper lowered an inch, his eyes peeking over the edge. I didn't know it yet, but what Linda was about to say would change my life, Emma's life, and hers, forever. Emma's hand tightened around mine under the table. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Linda inhaled deeply, like she'd been holding this truth for years. "It's about the day you two met, and the real reason I invited you here tonight." Emma's fork clinked against her plate. "The real reason?" Linda nodded slowly. "Yes. And once I say it, there's no going back." The air in the room felt heavier, like the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway, each second stretching longer than the last. Linda folded her hands on the table, her gaze shifting between Emma and me. "The day you met at the coffee shop," she began slowly, "wasn't an accident." Emma's brows knitted together. "What do you mean?" "We just ran into each other." Linda shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart. I was there. I saw you two from across the street. And I made sure you would talk to each other." I felt my chest tighten. "You planned it?" Her eyes softened, but there was a flicker of something else, fear, maybe regret. "Yes. But it wasn't just matchmaking. I had a reason, a very important one." Emma's dad finally put his newspaper down completely, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Linda," he said quietly, almost like a warning. Emma leaned forward, her voice trembling now. "What reason could you possibly have to interfere like that?" Linda took a slow breath. "Because I knew something about you, and I knew something about him, and if you didn't meet, both of your lives would have taken a very different, and much worse, path." I felt my pulse in my ears. "What could you possibly know about me?" I asked. Linda's next words sent a shiver down my spine. "I know who your father really is." Emma's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Wait, what? What does my boyfriend's father have to do with anything?" Linda's eyes flicked toward me, then back to Emma. "Because, sweetheart, your father and his father were once best friends. Closer than brothers. Until something happened that tore them apart." I blinked, completely thrown. "That's impossible. My dad never mentioned anything about knowing yours." Linda gave a small, sad smile. "That's because he wouldn't. They swore never to speak of it again. But I was there. I saw it all." Emma's dad cleared his throat, but Linda pressed on. "It was 25 years ago. They worked together on a project, something big. But a betrayal ended everything. One of them took the blame for something neither of them did, and it cost them both everything they'd built." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Why are you telling us this now?" Linda looked at her daughter with an intensity that made my stomach twist. "Because the truth was buried to protect you, Emma. And you," her eyes locked on me, "were never supposed to get caught in the middle." Emma reached for my hand under the table, her grip trembling. "Mom, what did Dad do?" Linda shook her head. "It's not what your father did, it's what his father did to save yours." I felt the blood drain from my face. My voice cracked when I asked, "What are you saying? That my dad sacrificed himself for Emma's father?" Linda's silence was all the answer I needed. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Emma's fingers were laced tightly with mine, as if letting go might somehow make this moment worse. Linda's eyes glistened. Your father took the fall for something he didn't do, she said softly. It was a financial scandal, embezzlement charges. The real culprit was someone higher up, but if that man went down, dozens of families would have lost everything overnight. Emma's dad stared down at his plate, his jaw tight. Linda continued, your father, Michael, she looked at me, stepped in and signed papers, claiming full responsibility. He knew it would ruin his career, his reputation, maybe even his future. But he did it anyway. Emma looked confused. But why? Why would he do something like that for Dad? Linda's voice cracked. Because your father once saved his life. It was years earlier, when they were still young. There was an accident at the factory, a piece of machinery malfunctioned. Your dad, she nodded at Emma, pulled Michael out just seconds before it would have crushed him. Michael swore he'd repay that debt, no matter the cost. My throat felt dry. He never told me any of this. Linda gave me a look that was half sympathy, half apology. He didn't want you to grow up thinking your family was defined by that moment. But the truth is, that choice changed everything for both families. And if you and Emma hadn't met, the final chapter of that story might never have been written. Emma blinked rapidly, her voice trembling. What do you mean, final chapter? Linda hesitated, then whispered, there's something still unfinished, and it involves both of you. Emma and I exchanged a look, half confusion, half fear. What do you mean? I asked, my voice lower than I expected. Linda glanced toward her husband, who gave the smallest shake of his head, as if silently warning her not to continue. But she ignored him. Before Michael, your father, signed those papers, he made one condition, Linda said. He wanted your family to keep a certain promise, one that's never been fulfilled. Emma leaned in. What promise? Linda's voice dropped, as though the words themselves were dangerous. That if anything ever happened to him, your family would make sure his son never went through what he did. That you would be protected, no matter what. I swallowed hard. Protected from what? Linda's gaze was steady now, almost sharp. From the man who was really behind it all, the one who walked away untouched. Emma frowned. Wait, you mean he's still out there? Linda nodded slowly. Yes. And recently, I learned something that made my blood run cold. He knows who you are, and he knows you and Emma are together. A chill crept down my spine. Why would that matter to him? Her next words hit like a thunderclap. Because if you two stay together, it could expose everything he spent decades hiding. And I think he's willing to do whatever it takes to stop that from happening. Emma's grip tightened on my hand. Mom, are you saying we're in danger? Linda didn't answer right away. She just looked at us both and said quietly, I'm saying the past has found you, and it's not going to let go easily. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in Emma's room felt heavier, every creak of the house sharper. Linda's words kept circling in my head, the past has found you. Around midnight, I got up to get a glass of water. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. As I passed the front door, something caught my eye. There was an envelope on the floor, slid just far enough under the doorframe to be seen. No postage. No handwriting on the front. Just plain white. A wave of unease rushed over me. I picked it up, my hands already cold. Emma's voice startled me from behind. What's that? I turned toward her, holding the envelope like it might burn me. I don't know. It was just here. We walked into the living room and opened it together. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold letters, leave her, or history will repeat itself. Emma's eyes widened, her face draining of color. Oh my God, this is about what Mom told us. I looked toward the window, half expecting to see someone watching. The street outside was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't alone. Emma whispered, we have to tell Mom and Dad. Before I could answer, a loud knock echoed through the house, 3 slow, deliberate knocks that seemed to shake the air. We froze. Linda's voice called from down the hall, urgent and sharp, "Don't open that door." The 3 knocks still echoed in my head as Linda hurried into the living room, her robe tied loosely around her waist. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. "Step back," she whispered, motioning for us to move away from the door. Emma clung to my arm, her breathing quick and shallow. From the other side, a man's voice spoke, calm, almost too calm. "Linda. I think it's time we talked." Emma's dad appeared from the hallway, a heavy flashlight in one hand, his expression unreadable. "It's him, isn't it?" he muttered. Linda didn't answer. She just pressed her lips together and unlocked the chain latch, but didn't open the door. "What do you want?" she called out. The man chuckled softly. "Just to give the boy some friendly advice. He's walking into a story that already has its ending written. And trust me, he won't like the ending." Emma's grip tightened on me, but I felt something shift in my chest, fear mixing with anger. I stepped forward, my voice firm. "If you're the one who sent this letter, then say whatever you have to say to my face." There was silence for a beat, then the man replied, "Oh, I will. Sooner than you think." The sound of footsteps faded into the night, followed by the distant growl of a car engine starting. Linda locked the door again, her hands trembling. "That wasn't a warning," she said quietly. "That was a promise." Emma's dad turned to me, his expression grave. "If he's come to the door, it means he's already decided the game has started. And we need to decide if we're playing, or running." The next morning, the house was unnervingly still. Emma's dad was at the kitchen table, staring at his untouched coffee. Linda was pacing by the window, peeking through the blinds every few minutes. I sat beside Emma, still replaying the man's voice in my head. Calm. Confident. Like he already knew we were trapped. Linda stopped pacing and turned to me. "I need to know exactly what you told people about your life. Online, in person, anything." I frowned. "Why?" She sighed, her voice low. "Because last night wasn't a random scare. It means he's been watching for a while. And he doesn't make moves unless he already has everything." Just then, there was a knock at the door again, not slow and deliberate this time, but quick, almost casual. Emma's dad grabbed the flashlight from the counter and opened the door a crack. A delivery man stood there, holding a small cardboard box. "Package for Michael's son," he said, glancing at me. I froze. I hadn't given this address to anyone. Emma's dad took the box, shut the door, and set it on the table. "No return address." Linda sliced it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single object, my old childhood baseball glove, with a photo tucked inside. The photo was of Emma and me at the coffee shop the first day we met, taken from outside through the window. Emma's voice broke the silence. "He was there that day," I felt my chest tighten. "He's been watching us from the very beginning." Linda looked at me with a mix of fear and resolve. "That's how he works. He doesn't just threaten you, he lets you know you've been in his story all along." Emma's eyes darted between me, her mom, and the photo. This means he didn't just find out about us recently. He planned this." Linda nodded slowly. "Yes. And if he knew where you'd be that day, then he was pulling strings before either of you even realized it." I shook my head. "But how? I didn't even plan to go to that coffee shop. I was on my way somewhere else, and my phone battery died. I just stopped there because I needed a charger." Linda gave a humorless smile. "Exactly. You think it was coincidence. But what if the person you were supposed to meet was never going to show up? What if your phone dying wasn't an accident?" Emma's brow furrowed. "You're saying he orchestrated our meeting?" Linda's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "That's how he works. He sets the scene, waits for the pieces to move into place, and then makes it feel like fate. Emma's dad, who had been silent until now, spoke up. I remember something from that day. Linda, didn't you run into an old friend right before we came home and you told me about the meeting? Linda froze. Yes, but it wasn't an old friend. It was him. He stopped me on the street. Asked me about you, Emma. And about Michael's son. My stomach twisted. So, you did see him before we met? Linda nodded, guilt clouding her face. And he made it sound harmless. Like he was trying to make amends for the past. I didn't know he was setting a trap. Emma's voice trembled. Mom, what does he want from us? Linda's eyes darkened. Not from us. From you two. Together. He believes if you stay together, something hidden will finally come out, something that could destroy him. The room seemed to shrink around us as Linda's words hung in the air. Emma's hand gripped mine so tightly it almost hurt. I swallowed hard. What could possibly be so dangerous about us being together? Linda took a deep breath, as if she'd been dreading this moment for years. Because the scandal your father took the blame for, wasn't just about money. It was about ownership, of something worth far more than cash. Emma leaned forward, her voice shaky. Ownership of what? Linda's eyes flicked to Emma's dad before she answered. A piece of land. But not just any land. Beneath it, there's something buried. Something your father and Michael discovered together, and kept secret. I frowned. Buried? Like, treasure. Linda shook her head. Not gold. Not jewels. Documents. Evidence that could bring down powerful people, including him. The man at our door. Emma's dad finally spoke. Your father's hid it there, thinking no one would ever find it. But if the two of you ever connected, you might put the pieces together and realize the truth. And he can't allow that. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you know where it is? Linda nodded slowly. Yes. But getting there won't be easy. And if he suspects you're looking for it, he'll come after you. My pulse was pounding. Then we go before he realizes. We get whatever's buried and end this. Linda's gaze locked on mine. If you do this, there's no turning back. Once you take that first step, you're declaring war on a man who's been winning for decades. Emma looked at me, her eyes steady despite the fear. Then let's not give him another decade. By sunrise, the decision was made. We were going. Linda handed me an old, worn envelope before we left. Inside was a faded map, the edges torn, the ink smudged with time. Your father drew this himself, she said. Follow it exactly, no detours. Emma packed a small bag while her dad gave us his car keys. It's not fast, but it's reliable, he said. And it doesn't have GPS, less chance of being tracked. The drive was long and tense. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I half expected to see a black SUV trailing us. At first, the road was busy enough that I couldn't tell if anyone was following. But as the miles stretched on and the countryside grew emptier, one car kept appearing in the distance behind us. Emma noticed too. That white sedan, it's been there since the highway. I tried to stay calm. Could be a coincidence. Her voice was tight. Do you believe that? We turned off onto a narrow dirt road lined with tall trees. The white car didn't follow, at least, not immediately. But as we reached the clearing where the map said to park, I spotted fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Someone's been here recently, I muttered. Emma looked around nervously. You think it's him? I crouched down, touching the tracks. The edges were sharp, too sharp. These were made today. Hours ago. Before I could say more, a glint of metal caught my eye. Wedged between two roots was a small, black object with a blinking red light. Emma's eyes widened. Is that a tracker? I didn't have to answer. Because at that moment, from somewhere deep in the trees, a twig snapped, and the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps began to move toward us. The footsteps grew louder, crunching through dry leaves. Emma's hand found mine, her grip trembling but strong. "Stay behind me," I whispered, though my own voice was far from steady. From between the trees, a tall figure emerged. It wasn't just a man, it was the man. The one from our door. His tailored coat looked out of place in the wilderness, but the smirk on his face told me he felt perfectly at home. "I told you," he said smoothly, "we'd talk sooner than you think." Emma stepped forward, defiant. "Why are you doing this? What could we possibly have that's worth all of this?" He tilted his head, studying us. "Not what you have. What you might find. I can't let that happen." I took a step toward him. "You mean the land? The documents?" His smirk faded for the first time. "Careful, boy. Curiosity is dangerous." Before he could move closer, a voice rang out from behind him, calm, steady, and full of authority. "That's close enough." It was Emma's dad, holding the heavy flashlight like a weapon. And behind him, Linda, with a phone in her hand, the red light blinking, recording everything. The man's eyes narrowed. "You think a video will stop me?" Linda's voice was cold. "No. But sending it to 3 people who already have copies of the map will." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, with a sharp exhale, he stepped back. "This isn't over," he warned, disappearing into the trees as quickly as he'd come. We stood in silence until the sound of his footsteps was gone. Then Linda turned to us, her voice firm. "We go now. We dig it up, we finish this, and we never look back." Hours later, as the first rays of dawn lit the clearing, we unearthed a rusted metal box. Inside, sealed in plastic, were the documents, photos, and signed statements that told the whole story. Enough to end his career, his influence, his power. Emma looked at me, her eyes wet but determined. 3 lives, she said softly, never the same again. And she was right. Because from that day forward, our story was no longer about the danger that found us, it was about the choice we made to face it together.